Hi, Keith here from Academy of Bass. Today I'm going to show you a really great funk bass line that uses the major scale. The major scale is one of the first things that we learn, and for good reason, because it's probably the most important piece of harmonic information that you can know as a musician. And on bass we learn the patterns and shapes and practice them relentlessly, but when it comes to using the scale as a musical tool to play bass lines, it can be really difficult getting away from the scale pattern. And I don't know about you, but I'm yet to hear a bass line that uses the scale in that way, either played ascending or descending. Until now, because today I'm going to be looking at a bass line from a song called I Want You, which was on an album called Victory, released in 1980 by Narada Michael Walden. If you're not familiar with Narada Michael Walden, he's a great drummer and a great music producer too. The bass on this album was played by Randy Jackson of American Idol fame, who's a great player. Now, apart from the major scale element, which I'm going to get to in a minute, it's packed full of funk cliches, some of which I'm going to look at, but I'm going to start by looking at the core bass line first. So like a lot of funk bass lines, it's quite repetitive and the chord progression is also quite simple. So we're starting with the B minor chord and the bass line plays. So we've got B the root, C sharp the second and D the flattened third. Then it's on to G major. So we've got G, A the second, and this time B the major third. So we're still playing root, second and third, but the third's been altered to suit the chord. And there are a couple of articulations too. So before the G, there's a muted note. Now you can play that as a muted E string or a short open E string, it doesn't really matter. And on the B, the third of G, there's a slide every time. Now we're into an E minor chord and we're playing exactly the same motif that we played over B minor, but starting on E. So we've got E, F sharp the second, and G the flattened third. So we've got a root second third harmonic motif, which is really tuneful, so tuneful that you could sing it boom ba boom boom boom, boom boom ba boom boom boom, boom ba boom boom boom. And when we add the rhythm to it, we get a really funky bass line. Now that's followed by, which is G, A, and A sharp, which leads in chromatically back to the B minor. And it's over this G, A, and A sharp that a lot of the funk cliches come in, because every time it's played in the song, there's a different combination and different variation of funk octaves. And if you know anything about funk music, you know that octaves are one of the best things that you can play in any funk bass line. But where's the major scale, I hear you shouting? So if you check out the original recording, at about 3 minutes, there's a breakdown which largely features the bass. It plays through lots of cycles of the chord progression, but the first 3 times is where a lot of the interesting stuff happens over G, A, and A sharp. And it's the 4th time where the major scale run comes through. And this is what it sounds like. I don't know what it is about this bass line, but every time I hear it or play it, it really does make me smile. When you do hear it, it doesn't smack you in the face and say this is the scale, because it's so musical. The other thing that makes this line interesting and disguises the fact that it's a scale is that every time a scale note's played, it's followed by a muted note, and that also really introduces some great rhythm. So we've got a descending D major scale here, and for every scale note it's followed by a muted note, and at the end we pull off from D to C sharp, which leads back into the B, by the way, B minor. Now, that's a really interesting technique, and that's the other great thing about this bass line, because it's now giving us something new to practice and work on and develop our technique. So I'm going to look really quickly at something that will help you build your muting technique, and I'm going to play a D major scale, ascending and descending, and I'm going to play each scale note with my first finger, my index finger, and I'm going to follow that by a muted note that I'm going to play with my second finger. So I'm using a consistent picking pattern, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that the volume of the muted note is the same as the scale note. And now descending. Now, obviously we're not playing it up to speed, but that's something that you can develop in time. Now, on the subject of the bass line, when we play this bass line, rather than play a muted note, and by the way, I'm playing that muted note by just lifting my finger and resting it lightly on the string. But you can play that in a different way. So really untidily there, I showed you how we can play the scale and then play an open string. If I play that with a bit more control, so we've got two options. Within the context of the bass line, both will work, so give them both a try. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look at the part of the bass line where we play over G, A and A sharp, because this is where the octave combinations happen, and I'm looking specifically at the first three passes in this middle section of the song. And I'm going to look at what's played using these octave combinations before the major scale line comes in. Each of these three variations are rhythmically different, although they do share similarities. And the first two are played using a slap bass technique, whereas the third is played using fingerstyle. So here's the first. So this is essentially octaves, G, A and A sharp. The first G, nice and straightforward. The second G, as soon as we hit the octave, we're down to this open E, which leads us into A and A sharp. Now, of course, we lead into this G chord from the E minor before it. And before every G throughout the whole piece, we've got an open E. So that gives us... Now, the second time through is a little bit more complicated rhythmically, although it uses one of the rhythms that we've just played. So the first G is, we've got this octave G down to open E. And that's answered with, so we've got a quick fire G octave. And we play exactly the same thing over A and A sharp. So we play an A octave, down to open E, and then A sharp. And the third time through is, so we've got a G octave, an open E, A octave back to A root note, and exactly the same on A sharp. And of course that's it, because the last time we're straight into our descending D major scale. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this bass line as much as I do. Make sure you grab the PDF, that link's posted below. It's got a full transcription of the bass line in it, and there's a full analysis of all the funk octaves that are played throughout the piece too. Feel free to give things the thumbs up, support the channel by subscribing. Thanks for joining me, look forward to seeing you again, and in the meantime, happy practicing.